So I will be drawing the branches of the celiac trunk, the superior mesenteric artery, the inferior mesenteric artery, as well as the arteries that supply structures of the retroperitoneum. So we'll begin by drawing the abdominal aorta, and off of it we'll draw 3 circles like this. And these 3 circles will represent the anterior unpaired branches that we call the celiac trunk, the SMA, and the IMA. So this is the celiac trunk. This is the superior mesenteric artery, which I will abbreviate as the IMA. And this is the inferior mesenteric artery. And the first thing to understand is that the celiac trunk will supply organs of what we call the foregut, the SMA will supply organs of the midgut, and the IMA will supply organs of the hindgut. Okay. Let's begin by drawing the branches of the celiac trunk. We will often describe these as a tripod or a Mercedes sign. So I'm going to do this. And keep in mind that the actual celiac trunk is not visible from this eagle eyes view. The branch coming this way is called our splenic artery. And it has a tortuous appearance, and it often reminds me of a Arby's curly fry. This one coming up, like this. This is my left gastric artery. Left gastric. And it's important to know that the left gastric artery will anastomose with the right gastric artery around the lesser curvature of the stomach. Okay. Next, this artery coming over here is the common hepatic artery. And the common hepatic will travel towards the liver, and then it will bifurcate into a branch going up and into a branch going down. The branch that's traveling up is what we call our proper hepatic. And the branch that is traveling down, we call our gastroduodenal. Okay. The proper hepatic will bifurcate, like so, into right and left hepatic arteries. And the right hepatic artery will give an important branch to the gallbladder, shown here, called the cystic artery. Additionally, the proper hepatic itself also gives off the right gastric artery, which I will draw here. And I'm going to draw it in a different color. Let's draw it in green. And it comes over here, and it will form an anastomosis with the left gastric artery. So this is an example of an internal collateral of the celiac trunk of the right and left gastric arteries, forming an anastomosis around the lesser curvature of the stomach. All right. So we also have another internal collateral of the celiac trunk, and that is going around the greater curvature of the stomach. So let's begin by drawing the remainder of the branches of the splenic artery. So the splenic artery will travel posterior to the stomach and it will be embedded within the pancreas. So I'm going to draw a couple of arteries coming down like this, and we are going to name them non-specifically as just pancreatic branches. And I'll put a little quotation marks around so that you know that these branches have specific names that we won't talk about right now. All right. So the splenic artery will supply the spleen, it will supply the pancreas, but it will also supply the stomach. So I'm going to draw a couple branches going up like this, and these branches are what we call short gastric arteries. Short gastric. And they, as their name imply, supply the stomach, specifically the fundus of the stomach. So I'll put fundus in quotation in parentheses. Okay. Next, the splenic artery gives a branch going down like this around the greater curvature of the stomach, like so. And we call this branch the left gastroomental artery. It's also called the gastroepiploic. All right. So if there's a left gastroomental, that means there's probably a right gastroomental too. And that comes from our gastroduodenal artery. So I'm going to draw it in a different color. And it anastomoses with the left gastroomental artery. And this is our second example of an internal collateral within the celiac trunk. So we're going to put internal collateral, I cannot spell, internal collateral of celiac trunk between right and left gastroomental arteries around the greater curvature of the stomach. All right. Next, the gastroduodenal artery is going to give a branch going down, like so. That is going to split into two further branches that I will draw as a little U shape. And these are the arteries that form an anastomosis between the celiac trunk and the SMA. So we call these arteries the superior pancreatico-duodenal arteries. And the branches that the superior pancreatico-duodenal artery itself divides into is simply named anterior and posterior. Meaning that this branch over here is the anterior superior pancreatico-duodenal artery, and this is the posterior superior pancreatico-duodenal artery. All right. Now let's draw our branches of the SMA. So I'm kind of running out of space here, so we are going to move the IMA down a little bit. Then we are going to move the SMA down a little bit. Alrighty. Okay, so we're ready to begin drawing the branches of our SMA. So our SMA, the first branch it gives off is the inferior pancreatical duodenal artery. And these branches are, of course, named anterior and posterior. So here we have our first example of what we call a pancreatical duodenal arcade, and it represents a collateral between the arteries of the foregut and arteries of the midgut. So we will say anastomosis of celiac and SMA through pancreaticoduodenal arteries. This is called the pancreaticoduodenal arcade. Okay. All right. Continuing on from our SMA, we now have several branches that are going to the ilium, the ascending colon, and the transverse colon. So, our first branch, and keep in mind this is not anatomically accurate, just because I'm trying to show you all the branches on one page, but we have one branch that is essentially the termination of the SMA called the ileocolic artery. Ileocolic. And the ileocolic artery gives an important branch to the appendix that we call the appendicular artery. The SMA will also give a branch going to the ascending colon that we call the right colic artery. And then it will also give a branch that's going up towards where the transverse colon is. Imagine that the transverse colon would be up here. This is called the middle colic artery. On the other side, the SMA will give off branches going to the jejunum and the ilium that are known collectively as iliojejunal arteries. So, I'm going to draw a bunch of branches going this way. And we will call all of these arteries iliojejunal. Did I spell that right? Iliojejunal. Yes, I did. Biliojejunal. What's that? Okay. And something to keep in mind about the iliojejunal arteries is that some of them will have longer vasa recta, which are the long straight arteries that come off their distal segments. But to keep things simple, let's refer to these as iliojejunal for now. Okay. Moving on. So, we have so far drawn the branches of the celiac trunk, and now we have drawn the branches of the SMA. Now we are going to finish by drawing the IMA. So, the IMA is a bit simpler. So, the IMA will give off the left colic artery over here. The IMA will also give off sigmoidal arteries, so I'm going to draw them similar to kind of how I drew the iliojejunals. So a bunch of arteries over here that are all going to parts of the sigmoid colon. And we will call these sigmoidal. And then lastly, the continuation of the IMA will come down and become the superior rectal artery, going to the top of the rectum. Okay, so the IMA only has 3 branches: the left colic, the sigmoidal, and the superior rectal arteries. Great. All right, so we learned that there was an anastomosis over here between the branches of the celiac trunk and the SMA that we refer to as the pancreatical duodenal arcade. So there also exists an anastomosis between the SMA and the IMA, and we call that the marginal artery of Drummond. So I'm going to draw it in blue this time. And the marginal artery of Drummond is a big arcade that is formed from multiple branches of the SMA and the IMA, and it's going to look something like this. The exact branches that contribute to this arcade we will not be focusing on, but the main idea is to know that both branches of SMA and IMA contribute to that. So marginal of Drummond, or just marginal artery of Drummond. And I'm not going to circle it. I will. Okay. All right, ignore me. Okay. So here is what we have so far. Looking pretty crazy. Don't worry, we are almost done. So we have now drawn the branches of the celiac trunk, the SMA, and the IMA, and we're going to finish by drawing the branches that are going to the retroperitoneal. So before the branches of the celiac trunk come off, there are other branches that are going to the diaphragm. I'm going to draw them in a thicker color, not because they're thicker, but just to differentiate them from our other arteries. These are our inferior phrenics, shown over here. And then across to where the SMA comes off, we have branches going like so. And these are our renal arteries. And the renal arteries are, of course, going to the kidney. So below the renal arteries, we have what are called gonadal arteries. We're going to draw them in a different color. How's purple? So the gonadal arteries will come down like this. And remember, these are paired arteries, so they're on both sides. And the gonadal arteries will refer to either testicular or ovarian. All right. And then at the very distal segment of the abdominal aorta, there is sometimes a singular unpaired artery called the median sacral artery. So this is before this is right at the bifurcation. So let's also draw the abdominal bifurcation. Would be something like that. Okay, and the median sacral artery is coming off of the bifurcation. All right, and we will finish by drawing the branches of the abdominal aorta that supply the adrenal glands. So, our inferior phrenic, our renal artery, and the abdominal aorta itself will all give branches going to the suprarenal glands. So I'm going to draw these in, let's say, light blue. And these are named the superior, suprarenal, and these are coming off of the inferior phrenic artery. And then we have the middle suprarenal, and these are a direct branch coming off of the aorta. And then off of the renal artery itself, we have the inferior suprarenal arteries. And as their name implies, all these arteries are going to the adrenal gland. All right. This is the basic idea of the abdominal blood supply. So we have drawn the branches of the celiac trunk, the SMA, the IMA, as well as the branches that are supplying structures of the retroperitoneum, such as the renal arteries and the gonadal